Hello again, everyone. This is Dr. Mike Cochrane with Value Function Analytics. And today I'm going to go back to talking about value-focused thinking and specifically about fundamental objectives and their associated decision contexts. Most of the material in this presentation is going to be taken from Ralph Keeney's 1992 book called Value-Focused Thinking. And a few posts back on this blog, I introduced you to the concept of VFT as a way of approaching traditional decision problems by reframing them as opportunities to generate more and better alternatives. VFT then helps decision makers and stakeholders systematically describe and examine their fundamental objectives. In other words, their reason for engaging in this decision problem in the first place. And it's through objectives that the values of the decision maker are made explicit. So today, I want to talk a little bit more about those objectives and how they relate to the alternatives we must evaluate to achieve them. An objective is simply a statement of something that you want to achieve. It's characterized by three things: the decision context, the actual object under consideration, and a direction of preference. We'll talk more in detail about these three aspects of objective statements, but the context is just the scope of the decision problem. The object is the attribute you're concerned about in the decision, for example, safety or profit. And depending on whether the object is something good or bad, we'll want to maximize or minimize it as far as our preferences are concerned. It's also important to note that there are two types of objectives: fundamental objectives and means objectives. In structuring objectives, we're mainly concerned with fundamental objectives, or the basic reason we're engaged in the decision situation. The means objectives are clearly the means to achieving our fundamental objectives. The bottom line is that we need to define and structure the fundamental objectives so that we can use the resulting value model to help us evaluate our alternatives. Here are some examples of fundamental objective statements, and they're broken down so you can see the decision context, the object, and the direction of preference. As you can see, these fundamental objective statements are not complex. The key is further defining the three components of the statement so we're very clear about what we mean by the context, the attribute in question, and also what we mean by maximize. For example, how do we define safety or quality in this context? What would we consider to be the high end of our maximize scale? Our bumper sticker tells us that our set of alternatives is intimately linked to our objectives. So let's take a look at how we would start to visualize this. Keeney developed the concept of the decision frame to visualize the relationship of the decision context to the fundamental objective. The key thing to remember here is that the decision context space contains all the alternatives appropriate for our decision. This space then maps to the fundamental objective, or the ends objective, as opposed to the means objectives. And together, these two spaces define what we will call a decision frame. Let's take a look at an example of how decision contexts and fundamental objectives work together. This example is taken from Keeney's book, and it looks at four fundamental objectives related to managing carbon monoxide air pollution from factories, vehicles, and other sources. You can see how the breadth of the decision context has to match the breadth of the corresponding fundamental objective. The meaning of the decision context of managing carbon monoxide pollution directly follows from these respective fundamental objectives. Now, it may look to you that the decision context and the objective are one and the same thing, but they're not. For example, the decision context of managing CO emissions, the most narrow one, refers to the alternative ways we might manage emissions, such as putting scrubbers on smokestacks. And the corresponding fundamental objective refers to the implications of those alternatives, such as tons of CO emitted into the atmosphere. So you can see the difference. The broadest decision frame has to do with health effects due to carbon monoxide. Clearly, the breadth of possible alternative ways to do this in other words, minimize negative health effects, includes far more choices than just simply controlling carbon monoxide emissions. Here's another example of multiple related decision contexts. In this case, we're looking at objectives and corresponding alternative ways to provide high-quality ambulance service. The ultimate fundamental objective is to maximize the number of lives saved, but there are other related objectives and decision contexts as well. Look at minimized response time. Appropriate alternatives might include purchasing more ambulances, improving dispatch service, changing locations of ambulances, training drivers to select quicker routes. This last alternative would also be applicable to the objective maximize quality of ambulance personnel. And in looking at that objective of maximizing quality, in addition to the last one mentioned above, alternatives might also include placing better trained medical personnel on ambulances or give them better training. And both of the above objectives we just talked about contribute to the broader objective of minimizing travel time for the patient. Thus, the decision context to match minimize travel time includes the contexts for objectives 1 and 2. But there are alternatives that fit Objective 3 while not being appropriate for Objectives 1 and 2. These might include furnishing ambulances with special equipment to allow quicker at-the-scene evaluation of patients, or to assist in placing patients in an ambulance and preparing them for any travel involved. Let's talk briefly about strategic objectives. Whether they're clearly defined or not, everyone has them. It's important to make these explicit because they will be the guide to all decision-making in the organization. And don't forget that decision-making also involves the creation of opportunities, not just reacting to decision problems as they occur. And just as we want to clearly define our fundamental objective and the decision context, strategic objectives can't be vague, or else we lose their effect as guidance mechanisms. What if you're a CEO engaged in strategic planning? Well, here's how your strategic level objectives relate to all the other fundamental objectives you'll be dealing with in your organization. Your strategic objectives are the ultimate fundamental objectives for the organization, and every other objective in your organization now becomes a means objective to achieve your strategic objectives. In other words, the decision or the strategic decision frame encompasses all other decision frames. You don't have to be the CEO of a corporation to have strategic objectives. Everyone has them. Here's some examples of several strategic decision contexts, ranging from you as an individual trying to manage your life to the U.S. government trying to manage an entire country like the USA. One important point to be made here, strategic decisions, or strategic objectives rather, guide lower-level decision-making processes. Even though it's important to make them explicit, strategic objectives are rarely addressed at this level. They need to be scoped down to more specifics in order to foster useful decision analysis. Recall that in an earlier post I wrote about the opposite of value-focused thinking, and that is alternative-focused thinking. This occurs when your decision problem is driven primarily by the desire to select the best alternative among a few obvious ones, usually a status quo, a high-risk, and a low-risk alternative, or something similar. In alternative-focused thinking, there's no context. Therefore, your world is collapsed into just a narrow set of means objectives with no fundamental objectives, and to which these alternatives are mapped to these means objectives. The broken lines show that the fully fleshed out decision frame is completely missing here. You've got a few alternatives, A, B, and C, that are mapped to a set of means objectives. Remember that we want to map them to fundamental objectives. In a complete VFT decision frame, we see how everything fits together. Note how by specifying fundamental objectives and an associated decision context, we have now pushed out our decision frame with respect to possible means objectives. This also allows us to increase the range of potential alternatives. Keeney describes this as a push-pull process with some give and take, but the goal is the emergence of a reasonable set of fundamental objectives. Well, I hope that this has been helpful in taking a look at decision contexts and their relationship to fundamental objectives. As always, please give me an email, or send me an email rather, at valuefunction@gmail.com, or you can go to my website, valuefunctionanalytics.com. We'll see you next time.